Open an atlas from 3 centuries ago. Let your finger drift across the faded vellum, tracing the rivers like veins, the mountains like ribs under the skin of time. There, beyond the Urals, beyond the Caspian's black mouth yawning at the edge of the known, you will see it. The name sprawled across a continent like a scar of ink. Tartaria. Not a province, not a kingdom huddled in some valley's throat. An empire, vast as night, its spine curling from the Arctic ice to the jungles where the monsoon bleeds, its bones scattered across the deserts of Proust, Asia, and the frozen marrow of Siberia. Tartaria, a name spoken in the hushed Latin of old maps, in the cramped Gothic letters of European atlases like a riddle no one cared to solve. And then silence. By the 19th century, the ink begins to thin, the letters fade like breath on glass, the lines fracture, borders crawl inward like black ants devouring a carcass, and by the dawn of the industrial age, the name is gone. Not conquered, not broken, erased, as if the earth itself had swallowed it. As if a hand reached down from the clouded vault of time and scrawled across the map in iron script, "This never was." But it was. The cartographers swore it. The explorers whispered it by firelight in their journals. The merchants bartered in its markets, where caravans hissed like serpents through the dust of the steppe. And yet, when you speak its name now, the room goes still. Brows knot, lips twist. Tartaria? A myth, a fever dream cooked in the skulls of fringe historians. Because history is a garden, and the keepers prune what grows beyond the hedge. A stray empire sprawling across half a world does not fit the neat geometry of the tale we teach. The questions breed like flies in the dark. How do you delete a nation the size of the moon's shadow? How do you salt its memory until no root cracks the soil of fact? And why? Why was it necessary to gouge its name from the marrow of the maps while the world watched and did not see? This is not a footnote. It is a wound, a hole where an empire should be, an absence that glares like a blind eye from the skull of time. Because if Tartaria was real, if its bones still pulse under the silt of Siberia, if its blood hums in the ruins we walk without knowing, then the story we tell of ourselves is ash. Pull the thread, follow it through the wormholes of archives and atlases, through the brittle leaves of books bound in skin. You will find fragments, maps with ghost letters, chronicles muttering of kings who wore no crowns, cities that bloomed like frost on the glass of the world and then melted. You will find towers whose ribs claw the sky in deserts where no empire should breathe, domes that gleam like blind eyes from the fog of Siberia, ornament gnawed by wind, spires splintered like bones picked clean by a famine of centuries. And you will ask, who built these? And why do they look less like palaces than engines? Tartaria is not a myth. It is a ghost. And ghosts do not haunt without reason. They hover in the blind spots of memory, pressing cold lips to the ear of the present, whispering, "We were here, and what erased us will come for you." Spread the map across the table. The paper smells of centuries' ink bled to sepia veins, the edges gnawed by time like old bones. Trace the coasts, the rivers, the mountain chains, and then let your eyes climb north, past the green flood of Europe, past the jagged jaw of the Urals. There it is, the word sprawled like a black serpent across the pale void of Asia. Tartaria, not a province, not a fragment clinging to the fringe of empire, a world unto itself. In the maps of the 17th century, it yawns across half the globe from the Caspian's iron eyelid to the whaleback of Siberia breaking the ice. Its ribs run north to the Arctic jaw. Its feet wash in the Pacific surf. Great Tartary. The cartographers write it in letters fat as guilt, their pens scratching the silence of the page like claws. No hedging, no caveat, no whispered terra incognita. They knew it, they named it, and they drew it bold. What empire could breathe in that vastness? A land so swollen it dwarfs the kingdoms we crown in our history books. France and Spain would vanish in its throat like seeds down a gullet of shadow. China crouches at its hip like a hound. Russia? Not yet born in the shape we know, a phantom coiling on the fringe of a beast whose spine arcs to the pole. And yet open a modern atlas, you will find nothing, only names you know: Siberia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, the shards of something shattered under the hammer of time. No word of Tartary, no ash of its kings, not even the ghost of its flag fluttering in the margins of a page. Who lived there? The maps mutter hints. Tartars, Tatars, nomads stitched to the skin of the steppe, their yurts crouching like pale fungi under the black howl of the wind. That is the tale the scholars chant: savages on horseback, their hooves beating the tundra like war drums, their lives gnawed by frost and hunger. But the ruins argue louder. White bones of cities rising from Siberia's ribs, arches with scrollwork fine as lace, whispers of domes glazed in blue like drowned skies, stones too heavy for the backs of men, lifted with a grace our machines still sweat to mimic. What were these nomads building with? Wind? Prayer? Or something older, something braided with light? Every map tells two stories, the one you see and the one that hums beneath the ink like a worm in fruit. The visible tale says empire, the hidden one says anomaly. Because this land should not exist as an empire, too vast, too cold, too wild to leash with a single fist. And yet the maps insist, century after century, their quills carve the same dark name into the flank of the world, Tartaria. Until they don't. The 19th century comes like a blade. Borders fracture, lines crawl inward, the letters thin, blur, fade like ghosts retreating down a corridor of fog. By 1850, the word is a rumor clinging to the margins of atlases like frost. By 1900, it is gone. No empire bleeds so cleanly. No nation dies without a grave, unless the grave is dug in the mind and the body burned in the fire of language. The empire that shouldn't exist. And perhaps it never did. Perhaps it is a fever dream of ink, a mirage brewed in the skulls of men who guessed too much at the blank skin of maps. But if so, why do the ruins glare like teeth from the gums of the earth? Why do the archives groan with charts and chronicles muttering its name like a prayer? And why do we feel the tremor in our bones when we whisper it in the dark? Ride far enough into the Siberian hush, and the land becomes a prayer to emptiness. Forests gnarl under skies bruised with iron. Rivers coil like black serpents in the thawless dark. And then a shape. Not a tree, not a hill. A fragment of geometry jutting from the earth like a bone punched through flesh. A column, a cornice. The crumbling lip of an arch, its curve gnawed by centuries of wind. Its ribs furred with frost like the fur of dead beasts. It should not be here. Not in this wilderness where men live in huts stitched from bark and shadow. Not in this silence, 1,000 miles from the hum of cities. And yet it is. These are not ruins of chance, not the bones of shacks. They are monuments, cathedrals drowned in snow, palaces gutted by time, fragments of an architecture so deliberate, so heavy with symmetry. It mocks the myth of nomads. Domes swell like blind suns above the ribs of crumbling walls. Pillars bloom with scrollwork so fine it seems spun from breath. Arches rear like frozen waves, their keystones grinning through moss and rust. And the material, not wood, not clay, stone and marble, hauled from quarries that sleep hundreds of miles away, cut with a precision that makes a lie of flint and sweat. Ask the textbooks who built them, and they will stammer. The czar, the merchants, the zealots who lace their faith into the bones of the steppe. But the bones argue louder, because these palaces were not raised for trade, nor these cathedrals for peasants gnawed by frost. The scale is wrong, the design impossible for a land the books paint as savage and mute. This is not folk art, this is engineering. This is geometry braided with power, numbers whispered into stone like spells. Look closer. The domes flare like bronze suns, their flanks not smooth, but grooved with filigree curling in spirals that echo the ratios of galaxies. The windows gape in shapes that snarl at Euclid, their arcs stretched like bowstrings plucked by the fingers of God. Some bear scars of fire, their skins blackened, their ribs split like charred bones. Others drown in silt, half buried to the knees, as if the earth rose in wrath and tried to swallow what defied its law. And in their bellies pipes, hollow spines of iron veining the walls, coils that hissed once with currents now stilled to rust. What were they for? Heat? Water? Or something older, something that hummed with the breath of lightning, drawing power from the skin of the sky? The legends mutter of towers that drank the storm, of domes that glowed at dusk with a light not born of flame, of music throbbing through the bones of cities like the purr of some enormous engine caged in stone. Are these myths? Perhaps, but myths sprout from roots sunk deep in truth. And when you stand in the ribcage of one of these palaces, your boots ringing on tiles slick with centuries of dust, you feel the hum, faint, like a heartbeat under the crust of a corpse. What if these were not churches? What if they were not palaces? What if they were machines? Engines tuned to frequencies no ear can hear, lattices of stone and metal braided into nodes of the grid that throbs beneath the skin of the world? The architecture does not belong, not to the tale we tell of huts and yurts, of tribes stitched to the flank of frost. It belongs to something else, a culture that moved with the elegance of ratio, that spoke the syntax of stone as easily as breath. We do not know its name. We only know the silence it left, and the ruins it scattered like bones for us to trip over in the dark. Tartaria, a word scratched from the atlas but still grinning in the ribs of the world. An empire carved in marble, then drowned in mud, then erased with ink. But the stones remember, and stones do not lie. They lean in the snow and whisper, through teeth of frost, a truth that hums like thunder behind the skull. We were more than you are, and we will be again. Hold an atlas in your hands. Not the slick pages of a modern book where borders gleam like plastic scars, but the brittle flesh of an old map, yellowed like a tooth in the skull of time. Look there, the letters curling like black snakes across the frozen flank of Asia, Tartaria. 17th century, 18th, map after map, atlas after atlas, all chanting the same name like a mantra inked in iron. And then, silence. By the 19th century, the ink begins to thin. The lines shift like worms in the dark. What was once a single beast sprawled across half the globe fractures into fragments. Siberia, Kazakhstan, Turkestan, Mongolia, the names multiply like spores, and the old one rots. By 1850, Tartaria is a rumor clinging to the fringe of charts like frost. By 1900, it is gone, not conquered, not broken by wars that cracked the sky like whips, erased, salted from the soil of memory with the precision of a surgeon slicing rot from bone. How do you kill a name that fat? How do you bleed a word so vast it gorged on continents? Not with swords, not with cannons, with ink. Erase the maps, and you erase the mind. Scratch out the letters, and the empire dies its second death, the death of the tongue. History is not truth. It is architecture, a scaffolding of words where each beam props the next, where the shape of the whole depends on what you choose to hammer in and what you tear out. We trust the keepers of the maps. We kneel to their grids of ink as if they were scripture. But every chart is a spell, and every spell has a caster. Who held the pen when Tartaria burned in silence? Who sliced the borders like meat on the butcher's block and swept the scraps into the ash pit of oblivion? The textbooks chant their litany: progress, order, civilization marching in lockstep across the tundra of time. They say the maps grew accurate, that the cartographers shed their skins of myth and learned to draw the world in its true bones. But the bones do not match the tale, because the ruins glare like blind eyes through the fog, because the towers still fang the sky in deserts where nomads should have slept in dust, because the records mutter of kingdoms whose names we now spit as jokes. Open the archives, leaf through the atlases bound in the leather of centuries. See the progression. 1626 Magnae Tartariae Pars, 1680 Grande Tartari, 1730 Tartaria Magna, bold as brass, fat as empire. Then watch the letters shrink, curl like spiders in the frost. By the late 1700s, the claws of Russia creep east like iron vines, gnawing the word from the map. By 1820, the British atlases whisper it only on the lips of Asia's edge. By 1850, it is a ghost scribbled in italics, a blush of ink too pale to outlast the next tide of revision. Why? Because the story had to hold. The tale of Europe as the axle of progress, the forge where steel first sang, the womb of modernity birthing its machines in a scream of steam and fire. There is no room in that gospel for a rival humming in the frozen east, a beast whose bones were engines, whose breath licked the sky with currents of light. Erase it, salt the maps, teach the children that the steppe was savage and mute, that nothing grew there but tents and teeth, and soon the lie flowers into truth, because memory is a field and ink is its frost. But the soil remembers. The stones mutter in their sleep, and the maps, the old maps, still crouch in archives like wolves in the dark, their claws of ink bared, waiting for the hand that will unroll them, the eyes that will blink at the sprawl of that forbidden word and whisper through teeth clenched with awe and dread. What else did they bury? Walk through the husk of an old cathedral. Feel the chill bleed from its bones. Tilt your head to the vault where stone curls like frozen waves, where domes bloom like metallic suns braced on ribs of marble. The books call them churches. They call them houses of prayer. But listen, do they sound like faith? Or do they hum with something older, something louder, a silence thick with the memory of power? Everywhere you look, the pattern repeats. Domes swollen like blind eyes, spires stabbing the sky with needle teeth, ornament coiling in spirals as if the architects were not chasing beauty, but resonance. Why the dome? Why that obsession with curves that catch the hiss of air, that cup the storm like a chalice? Why towers sprouting like antennae, their iron veins braided through stone like nerves? These were not built for sermons. They were built for flow, for channeling, for pulling something down from the vault of the sky and threading it into the bones of the earth. Look closer at the relics rotting in the archives. Diagrams of spires wired to coils, prints of fountains gushing in plazas that hide iron grids beneath their marble skin. Lamps burning cold blue light long before the filaments of Edison hissed. Legends crawl in the footnotes like silverfish, cities glowing without flame, machines whirring without smoke, music trembling from towers that drank the wind. Free energy, they call it now. But free for whom? And why was it buried? Then came the 19th century. The books trumpet its gospel. The Industrial Revolution, the Great Awakening of steel and steam. But look at the bones of that awakening, the sudden bloom of railways, the spires of power stations rising like twins of the old cathedrals, the grids of telegraph lines veining the earth like black arteries. Does it feel like invention or reclamation? As if a child stumbled on a shattered engine and tried to piece it back together with sticks and sweat? What if the soot-choked century we crown as progress was not a birth, but a salvage? What if we were scavengers, gnawing the carcass of a giant, stripping its bones for fuel, humming hymns to innovation, while the real knowledge smoldered in ash? The whispers of Tartaria grow louder in that light. Not a myth, not a phantom empire huddled in the steppe, but a grid, a network humming in marble and bronze, its nodes flaring in palaces and towers, its veins crawling under cobblestones, slick with centuries of dust. Perhaps the domes were not crowns, but capacitors. Perhaps the spires were not symbols, but antennas, their iron tongues licking the storms, sipping the fire that spat from the sun. What if the fountains were not ornaments, but engines? Their jets hissing in rhythm with turbines buried like serpents under stone. What if the streets were circuits, their curves tuned to frequencies that bent the breath of the air itself? And then the silence. The hum choked. The lights bled out. The towers blackened like teeth in a skull. Why? What storm scythed across that grid and tore its wires from the ribs of the world? Was it war? Was it wrath? Or was it design a hand curling from the shadows of power to crush a rival flame? They say knowledge is never lost. It is hidden, buried under the syllables of a new tongue, under the smoke of a story sold as truth. The relics still grin through the cracks. Domes shimmering in cities that wear the mask of piety. Arches humming in ratios too precise for whim. Pipes coiling in walls that should hold only prayer. We walk among them blind, calling them art, calling them faith, calling them dead. But the dead do not hum like this. The technology is gone, and yet it is not. It seeps through the marrow of our age, in the grids that snarl across continents, in the towers that claw the sky in steel instead of stone, in the hiss of currents caged in copper veins. But what we hold is ash, fragments, scraps of a code we cannot read. And the map of the full engine, the bright, burning heart of the old grid, is gone, erased in daylight, buried under soot and sermon, under ink and empire. Or maybe not. Maybe it hums still, deep in the black belly of the earth, waiting for the hand that will pluck the thread, the voice that will speak the syllable, and wake the grid from its 1,000-year sleep. History stammers when you press too hard. The ink runs thin, the lines blur. And in those smudges, in the gaps where the page curls like scorched skin, you will find the shadow of something vast, a war no one taught you to name. The 19th century glows in the gospel of progress. Steam hisses in the lungs of iron beasts. Rails lash the earth in black veins. Factories rise like altars coughing soot, and between their chimneys, the textbooks mutter of revolutions, of kings dragged by the hair, of flags flaring like wounds in the sky. But look closer. Listen for what the ink does not say. In the margins of newspapers, whispers crawl like worms, entire cities drowned in mud, their streets gulped by tides of silt, as if the earth had spat its black blood. Church spires jutting from seas of clay like drowned fingers, walls stripped to bone by torrents that came howling from skies veined with fire. They call it disaster, flood, acts of God. But the pattern hums wrong, because it was everywhere: Siberia, Europe, the Americas choking in the same gray throat of ruin, brick blackened in Moscow, boulevards of Paris grinning through masks of ash, St. Louis clawed into silence by rivers of mud. And under the smoke of this natural wrath, armies marched. Wars bloomed like bruises across the skin of the world. Napoleon gnashing his teeth in the snows, Crimea writhing in blood, conflicts flaring where no one can name the cause without stammering. Why so many wars? Why this frenzy to redraw maps, to salt borders, to topple thrones as if the earth itself demanded a purge? What if the wars were smoke? A veil stretched across a wound too wide to stitch. A theater built to blind the eye while the real fire roared in the dark. What if this was not war between kings, but war against memory? A war to burn the bones of a grid that glowed too bright, to shatter the engines humming in the ribs of cathedrals, to drown the last towers that still licked the storm for power. The whispers hiss a name, the mud flood. They spit it like a curse, like a joke rotting on the tongues of men who taste the iron of truths they cannot swallow. They say the earth heaved in rage, belched black tides that swaddled cities in clay. They say the streets lie 20 feet below your boots, paved with doors that now grin from the earth's gut like teeth. They say whole civilizations drowned not in water, but in mud, their lungs packed with silt, their spires strangled in a sludge thick as blood. And when the clay hardened, the scavengers came, not with prayers, with picks, with rails, with smoke that choked the sky into a bruise. They pried open the carcass of a world, ripped out its organs, sold them as progress. And the textbooks sang their hymn to the newborn age, while the bones of an empire gnashed in silence under their boots. The war you never learned about was not fought with muskets. It was fought with silence, with mud and ink, with stories salted into the earth until the roots of memory curled black and died. But the ghosts twitch still, in the catacombs of old cities where arches snarl in ratios no architect can name, in the stairways that plunge to doors grinning under layers of earth like mouths gagged with clay, in the veins of bricks whose dates snarl with lies, their mortar whispering centuries that should not exist. Ask the maps why they lied. Ask the ruins why they hum. Ask the earth why it keeps coughing bones when we dig too deep for gold. The answers crawl under your skin like frost, because this was not a disaster. It was an execution, and the body they butchered was Tartaria. History calls it progress, but when you peel the skin from that word, you will find war. And not a war to conquer, but a war to erase. Some things rot in shadows, others burn in the sun. The erasure of Tartaria was no whisper in an alley, no dagger glinting in the ribs of midnight. It happened in daylight, while the streets hissed with steam, while the presses roared like iron throats, while crowds knelt before the altar of progress and sang hymns to a future brewed in smoke. The murder wore a smile, and we called it civilization. Start with the schools, the children lined in rows like bones in a trench, their eyes wide as mirrors, the old maps ripped from the walls, rolled like scrolls and fed to the fire, new maps unfurled, their lines neat as sutures, their colors singing the gospel of a world sewn shut, Europe fat with pride, Russia bloated east, China shackled to its cage of silk, and the vast pale flank of Asia scrubbed clean. No Tartaria, no name sprawling like a black serpent across the belly of the world, just silence, white as chalk. Then the books, the chronicles salted, the atlases sewn in new skins of ink, the old words drowned under a tide of print that screamed the creed of the age. Progress, empire, order forged in the crucible of steam. History became a machine. Its gears chewed centuries into slogans. Its pistons pounded nuance into dust. And in the roar of that engine, the bones of a world were fed like coal. But the bones were too many, too loud. They jutted from the mud like the teeth of drowned beasts, arches snarling in frozen tundra, domes flaring like bronze suns above cities no text dared to name, rail lines veining continents long before the gospel of locomotives. So, the story bent. The ruins were called follies, their symmetry chalked up to whim. The towers were painted with the word religion, like a bandage slapped on a slit throat. The pipes coiled in their ribs were dismissed as plumbing. Their iron tongues that once licked lightning choked with rust. And the hum, that faint, low drone that curled in the stones when the wind combed their spines, was called silence. We watched it happen. Not we, but the we braided in the marrow of our blood. The ghosts crouching behind our eyes. They saw the fires eating the old charts. They heard the sermons hissing from the pulpits of ink and iron. This is progress. This is truth. This is the map of the world as God wrote it. And they nodded, because the lie was beautiful, because it sang of order in a century drowning in smoke, because no one wants to believe the soil under their boots is stitched with graves that still twitch in the dark. The erasure was surgical, borders sewn tight as wounds, timelines sutured until the scar looked like skin. The great expanse salted with names that glimmer like shards of glass. Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, tiny syllables stitched over a scream. This is how you kill a civilization. Not with fire alone, with words. With ink poured like bleach over the parchment of time. With maps that do not mirror the bones of the earth, but the hunger of the hands that hold the quill. And yet, for all their ink, for all their fire, the ghost does not starve. It crouches in the catacombs of old atlases, in the dust of libraries where the pages wheeze like lungs under the knife of centuries. It hums in the stones that grin through snow in Siberia, their flanks veined with iron, their curves snarling at the geometry of faith. Tartaria was erased in daylight, not hidden, not smothered in the velvet of secrecy, destroyed where all could see, because no one was looking, because the world was too drunk on the narcotic of progress to notice the execution crouching behind the hymn. And now, when you whisper its name, people laugh. They call it myth, madness, the fever of men who drown in the puddles of conspiracy. But truth does not die when mocked. It coils. It waits. And sometimes, when the night is fat with silence and the hum crawls under your skin like frost, you will hear it, the echo of a name the fire could not burn. Tartaria. If Tartaria was ash, why does the smoke still sting? Why, 2 centuries after the ink turned cold, do we still feel the hum curling through the cracks of the world like a serpent of light? Because silence is not forgetfulness. It is strategy. Ask yourself, why bury a corpse so deep? Why salt the roots, burn the maps? Teach the children that the empire was a mirage spat from the fever of old cartographers. You do not erase what does not matter. You erase what matters too much. The story they teach us that history is a ladder we climbed rung by rung, from mud to flame to steel, is fragile as frost. It shatters the moment you see the bones grinning through the snow, because if Tartaria stood, if its domes drank the sky, if its spires hissed with power braided from wind and light, then progress is a lie. Then our engines, our toys scavenged from the ash of giants. Then the gospel of modernity rots in the throat. And if that lie dies, so does the order built upon it. The markets, the crowns, the chains, the hum of power that does not glow in copper, but in blood. The silence holds because the truth is dynamite, not for the past, for the now. Because what we call nations are scaffolds hammered over a grave. Because the geometry of the grid we think we built was already humming in the bones of a world we butchered to wear its skin. If we remember, we ask. If we ask, we tear the veil, and behind that veil crouches something older than kings, older than steam, older than bone, the knowledge that the cycle is not a line but a wheel, and the wheel is turning again. Look around you. Towers fanging the sky in glass and steel, grids veining continents with wires fat as arteries, domes swelling above power stations, their curves echoing ratios we call coincidence. We think this is the future. It is the echo of a chord plucked long ago, a pattern grinding back into place. Perhaps the silence holds because the hum has not died. Perhaps the hand that crushed the old grid did not kill it, only banked its fire until the air fattened with the smoke of another age. And maybe that age is now. The ruins do not sleep. They lean in the snow like wolves with glassy eyes, their ribs furred with frost, their spines tangled in the roots of pines. But under their skins of rot, the iron hums, faint, hungry, waiting for the syllable that will wake it, the chord that will split the silence like a blade of thunder. What happens if it wakes? If the grid gulps breath again? If the towers we mocked as temples bare their teeth and drink the storm? Does the world burn or bloom? Do we kneel or do we fall? They keep the silence because the silence is a leash, because the map must hold. Because if you tear the chart and scrawl the old name in the wound, the story dies. And with the story dies the spell. And when the spell shatters, the cage splits and the wolf crawls out. You think Tartaria is about the past. It is not. It is a mirror tilted toward the future, and in its black glass you can see the wheel, grinding, sparking, coming full circle. We thought we killed the empire, but you cannot kill a pattern. You can only bury it in ink and pray the hum does not rise through the soil and curl into the lungs of the age like smoke. But smoke is already in the air. You can taste it when the wind combs the wires, when the lights blink in towers that claw the sky like iron fingers, when the earth groans under grids fat with currents it should not know. The silence holds, for now, but not forever, because the past is patient and the wheel does not care if you believe in its teeth. It turns. When it comes full circle, you will look at the ruins, and they will not be ruins. You will hear the hum swell to a roar, and you will whisper the name the fire could not burn, the ink could not bleach, the silence could not starve. Tartaria. And the world will answer.